We're absolutely delighted to see so many people here in person to this final public celebration of the Year of Harping that we've been having. And as you know from all of the publicity we've been doing, this is celebrating the life of Sheila Larchet Cuthbert in her 100th year. And I'm not going to say a word about Sheila because I have three stalwart harpists here today. Cliona Doris, Andreja, and Denise Kelly, who have all been associated with Sheila in one way or another, as have many of us harpists right throughout since the early 60s, since we all can remember. And they're going to give you a lovely journey through Sheila's life and achievement. None of this, of course, would be possible were it not for the support that Cruit Éireann Harp Ireland receives from the Harp Ireland and Andreja, the Arts Council and the Heritage Council, as well as the Department of Culture, Gaeltacht Arts, Sport and Media. So once again, you're very welcome. And before I hand over to Andreja, Cliona and Denise, I'd like to welcome Mary Cuthbert, Sheila's daughter, to the stage with a special message from Sheila. Sheila was unable to be with us this afternoon, so let me hand over to Mary.
Hello, you're all very welcome. Just a few words from my mother. She says, I would like to especially thank my fellow colleagues, Andreja, Cliona and Denise, for their presentations and to express my gratitude to Harp Ireland, who are doing such important work on behalf of our instrument. And I think the next sentence is something we would all aspire to. She says, I have enjoyed every moment of my life in music. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I want to start, first of all, by thanking my colleagues here who have joined us in this amazing journey into Sheila's life. That's the part I am doing. I'm going to talk about Sheila's life and her background, and also in her orchestral career, and Andreja is the best person to talk about that, but also in Sheila's international career, which people mightn't realise, but was a very, very important part of Sheila's life and a very, very important part for the harp community in Ireland. When I started to work on the life of Sheila Larchet Cuthbert, I realised in order to understand her personality, her drive, I would need to start by studying her family background. And as I thought I'd be going back to her parents, but as I delved into her father's family and into the family before that, I suddenly realised that really Sheila was formed, her personality, her commitment to the country, her commitment to her instrument was formed by her family background. And therefore, I'm going to jump back one generation and I'm going to start not with her parents. I delved into their lives, I discovered the history of the Larchet family, and that was a fascinating subject in itself. So I began to start with Sheila's grandparents, John Edward Larchet, and his wife Isabella Emily Farmer. Now, you look and you'll see Dame Street on the back of me and you're thinking, why is that there? It is relevant, all will be revealed. John Edward, born 1857, of French background, married Isabella Emily, born 1858. And they were married in St. John the Baptist Church in 1882. All this happened in London. Both, at the time of the wedding, were living in London, probably born there, certainly John Edward was. And the interesting thing was they must have moved to Ireland almost immediately. And Isabella's family had connections in Kilkenny. And that was what Mary had told me. But what was very fascinating, I came across an article on John Francis Larchet, written by Dr. David Wright. He's now a professor of social history of music at the Royal College of Music in London. And he was writing about J.F. Larchet. In it, he mentions that Isabella Farmer's family were possibly related to the Purcell family. And the Purcell family, of course, he was referring to as the 17th century composer Henry Purcell. Now, back to the print. I told you it was relevant. John Edward, once he came to Ireland, became involved in the wine business, and this led to him opening a hotel, a restaurant and a bodega, all housed in number 11 College Green. Because though we say it's Dame Street, from the bank, it sweeps along, and that is still College Green. There was a beautiful Georgian building, 1799, called the Commercial Buildings. And it was the hub of commercial life. In 1837, the Stock Exchange, which had been in the Royal Exchange, actually moved into the Commercial Building. So not only was the Larchet's Hotel there, but also the Stock Exchange. Absolutely the hub of commercial Dublin, all this area, and then became the financial hub as well. So those of you, I'm sure there are many here, who are Joycean scholars, will recall that Larchet's Hotel is actually quoted by Leopold Bloom in James Joyce's Ulysses. So the name Larchet is immortalised forever. Now, John Edward had a fine tenor voice, his wife Isabella, a pianist, and they had 11 children. One daughter died shortly after birth, but the other 10 children survived. Several were musicians and in the arts, and George Larchet, who was John Francis Larchet's younger brother, he was actually an actor and a film star, believe it or not. That's the interesting things once you delve into families. But it was their son, John Francis, who showed true promise. John Francis, I'm going to quote from him. You see him up there. Dublin is bursting with talent and artistic energy. This is what he said in 1942. A solemn duty of all of us is not to allow our cultural future to pass from our grasp. And as you can guess, that was Sheila playing the Carlo tune, arranged for her by John F. Larchet and transcribed by her. We had thought that we would have done like everybody else would have played. I know a lot of people thought we would. But when we actually listened to all of Sheila's playing, we decided it would be so lovely just to have her music, just her playing on this very special evening. So I hope that you enjoy it. It's going to be most interesting. There are a lot of interesting pieces. John Francis, so Sheila's father, born in Sandymount, 1884, into a musical background, went to CUS, Catholic University School, which is in Lower Leeson Street, where it actually started. It's still in the same place. And then, of course, it was a quick run down to the Royal Irish Academy of Music, which I'm going to say always as the Academy now, as we all do, to study with an amazing musician and a brilliant teacher called Professor Michela Esposito. And it was there that he met the equally talented musician from Limerick, a young lady called Madeline Moore, a violinist and a pianist. Now, he finished his studies at the Academy in 1912, and he was so good they immediately employed him. And he said that allowed him to get married in 1913. John Larchet had been involved with playing the piano conducting orchestras in the 3 cinemas in Dublin. So remember, this is the time of silent movies, no television, no nothing. So there were orchestras all over Dublin. It was incredible. And also at the Abbey Theatre as well. He told one very funny story that in one of the cinemas he went in, and there was a young under-manager there who didn't seem to be terribly interested in his job, James Joyce. The official Abbey records show him starting in 1909, but there's a poster. We have a poster here that is from 1908, and Sheila has it down 1907. Now, this was a really special time for the Abbey. You had W.B. Yeats, Katrina is here this evening, his granddaughter, Lady Gregory, John Millington Synge, and actually 2 of the actors, I was a bit shocked, was Eamon de Valera and Countess Markovich. At the Abbey, he was, of course, the music director, but that meant that you were the conductor, the arranger, the composer, and the pianist. We also have a poster dated Easter week 1916, showing that John Larchet's name was there for music director. The performances, of course, didn't go ahead for obvious reasons in 1916, and there's a big gap from 1916 in the Abbey calendar. And then there was a sudden surge of plays involving Larchet's name. 50 productions, 1917, 54, 1918, an incredible workload. I mean, it's just remarkable. Gerard Larchet said he used to take pride in the fact that he saw history being made. Mary told me that her grandfather actually was in the Abbey at the time of the uprising, and he decided to see what was happening. He walked around to the General Post Office. He was with the Abbey for 27 years. 1915, he graduated, Musbach, from Trinity College, followed by his doctorate in 1917, 2 years. It's remarkable. But from that day on, in the Abbey Theatre, he was known as the Doc. In the Academy, he was appointed professor in 1920, and then senior vice president of the Academy in 1925. And he continued teaching there until 1955. He was also appointed vice president of Trinity College, London. He was appointed professor of music in UCD in 1921, and he worked there until 1958. And he was instrumental in developing music as a major subject within the university and established a department of music. Now, this was extremely important. And it finally was established in 1944, and that was the year of Sheila's graduation from UCD. Not content with all that, he was appointed an examiner of music to the Department of Education, between 1907 and 1934, and he was the person who actually reorganised music. All the orchestral exams, all that, the exams for the Leaving Cert now and what would have been the exams in those days, he was the person in control. What was also very interesting was in 1922, General Richard Mulcahy was the Minister for Defence, and he approached Professor Larchet to ask him if he would be involved in setting up the Army School of Music. The following year, in 1923, Dennis McCullough, I'm sure you all remember McCullough Pickets, but Dennis McCullough was in Germany on business, and he met two outstanding musicians, Prussians, the musicians Fritz Brase and Christian Sausweig. He suggested their names to Professor Larchet. Both men were persuaded to come to Ireland. Now, Fritz Brase, he became a colonel, negotiated his own salary, and Herr Sausweig became a captain, but was paid as in army pay. They were graduates of the Leipzig and the Berlin academies, and Sausweig had actually played in the Berlin Phil. They were amazing musicians. And I said, actually, to Andreja earlier, I mean, what would we have done without all these wonderful musicians who flooded into Ireland? And she will be covering that in her talk later. An incredible Army School of Music. Now, Colonel Fritz Brase, he died in 1940, and then Captain, who then turned Major, who then turned Colonel, Sausweig took over the Army School of Music. And what is a very interesting thing, Sheila was one of three children. Maura, very famous viola player, the principal viola player in Radio Ireland Symphony Orchestra, NSO, and also the New Irish Chamber Orchestra, and also her baby brother, Jerry Larchet, Gerard. And he was one of Sausweig's students, Jerry Larchet. Sausweig came to play and teach 15 instruments. Very talented man. Professor Larchet also served on the subcommittee for music, the RDS, and he was president of the Dublin Grand Opera Society for 26 years. And I'd like to again quote from Professor Larchet. The chief aims of the Dublin Grand Opera Society are, firstly, to provide the city of Dublin with performances of a high standard of excellence, and secondly, to foster native talent and to lay the foundations of a national school of opera which shall be truly evocative of the Irish spirit. In 1954, he was invited to arrange the national anthem, and that is still our official arrangement for the anthem. Now, throughout this unbelievable workload, his wife Madeleine was by his side. She was also a professor of music at the Academy, and she taught privately at home. I found it really interesting, it's something I hadn't realised, because I was a member of the Music Association of Ireland and on the committee for the music, the MAI. We will, if any of you have been to school concerts, if you're young enough, all the MAI used to send all the musicians around. It was fantastic. She was actually, Mrs. Larchet was a founder member of the MAI, and she attended their first council meeting in 1948 with Brian Bordell, Olive Smith, that is Gillian Smith's mother, and this was the founding of the National Youth Orchestra. This is where the National Youth Orchestra was founded. Frederick May, the composer, and Alois Fleischmann, professor of music in Cork. They lobbied for the orchestra, for music in schools, etc. Now, Madeleine was also the official accompanist for the UCD Choral Society. The conductor, of course, was the professor. And it was interesting, there's a wonderful interview done with Professor Larchet. Norris Davison did it, and it's in the archives. And you should really listen to it, because it is a snapshot of Dublin in the early 20th century. It's fantastic. But he said on it that his wife, Madeleine, was a brilliant musician and an excellent critic, a boon and a blessing to him. Gerard Larchet said that his mother had this extraordinary combination of artistic and business acumen, very handy. John F. Larchet then said once to Sheila, "The Lord has been very good to me. I have had two great loves in my life, your mother and music." In 1953, both Professor John F. Larchet and his wife, Madeleine Larchet, were awarded honorary doctorates from NUI for their services to music. Their first child, Maura, born 21, also a UCD music graduate, as I said, principal viola, symphony orchestra and Nico, followed by Sheila, 1923, as we all know, and finally Gerard in 26, a fabulous horn player. I did hear Gerard play. Fabulous horn player who also graduated from UCD, but not in music, in engineering. Gerard Larchet said, "Music was the life and soul of our house." So this was the household that Sheila was born into, a house brimming with music, both from her parents and siblings. She started studies with her parents, but once she had reached school age, she was sent to the academy where she studied both piano and cello, as did Mercedes Garvey. She was also a cellist. A student at Loreto Abbey in Rathfarnham, and she was very lucky to have gone there because she started harp studies there with Mother Alphonsus O'Connor. Now, Mother Alphonsus was a student of another Loretta nun, Mother Attractor Coffee. So when anybody has Sheila's book, you'll see MAC on a lot of the studies. And that was Mother Attractor Coffee, who is an extremely talented harpist, very highly regarded throughout the UK and Ireland. She was also very rigorous in her promotion of the harp, and it was actually Mother Attractor who got the harp included into Festio competitions. So Sheila followed in Maura's footsteps and attended UCD, and she graduated in 1944 with a first-class honours degree, of course. She also had perfect pitch, Sheila, as did her mother, which is very interesting because Andreja was playing for her the other day, and Sheila was listening to it. It was on the new concert harp belonging to the orchestra. And she turned to Sheila, "That's a wonderful E-flat string there. It really ran beautifully." Perfect, she was able to identify. Amazing, amazing. So following her graduation, Sheila left for Manchester, where she studied with the French harpist Tina Bonifacio, a student of Henrietta Renier, who was also had a student who was Cliona's second teacher after me, Suzanne MacDonald, different to mine. Tina was the harpist with the BBC Northern Ireland Orchestra in Belfast, but it was disbanded at the start of World War II, 1939, and then she moved to the BBC Orchestra in Manchester, and that is why Sheila found herself walking through rubble of buildings, etc., because she would have gone over there literally towards the end of the war. She graduated in 1944, and she had her first job in 1946. So Manchester was a very difficult place and was badly bombed. So I'm not going to discuss Sheila's orchestral life, you'll be delighted to know. I'm going to leave that to Andreja. However, I'm going to give you some dates so you will see how quickly Sheila, when she made up her mind to do something, she went for it. Liverpool Philharmonic, 1946 to 48. Radio Éireann Symphony Orchestra, 1948 to 1950. The Halle Orchestra, 1950 to 1952. And then the Radio Éireann Symphony Orchestra, 1952 until 1955. Now, in 1955, she was invited to join a very highly regarded ensemble, the Irish Festival Singers, which I have to say was a who's who of singers in Ireland. Amazing names. They were on a 3-month tour in the United States. Sheila asked RTE for leave of absence and was refused. So she accepted that, stayed on. But the next year, 1956, the festival singers were offered a 4-month tour. And Sheila in the United States again, and Sheila was invited to join them again, and there was no question of leave. Sheila was determined to go, and she resigned formally from the orchestra. Sheila said, "I felt I would never have another chance. The tour was an unforgettable experience, and I never regretted going." Well, I'm sure she didn't, because as it was on this tour that she met the very handsome and very talented singer, bass, who is standing, yes, literally beside her in this photograph, which was taken in Áras an Uachtaráin. And he was a member of Palestrina Choir and sung in actually the first Wexford Opera. He is one of the soloists. They were married in 1957, the next year, and they worked together, voice and harp. But they also managed to have a lovely daughter, Mary, whom I have to tell you was my bridesmaid as well. That's a major thing because she signs all her text to me, BN2, bridesmaid too. Now, one highlight of the tour was a visit to the set of the movie High Society, and this was very important for Sheila. When you went into Sheila's house, this photograph had pride of place. I was fascinated as a young person going in. Grace Kelly, Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra. Now, I didn't even put it down, I just said the story. There's a very funny story told that I think either Kitty O'Callaghan or somebody knew a priest, this is very Irish now, somebody knew a priest who knew Bing Crosby. And Bing Crosby, he mentioned that the Irish Festival Singers were on tour, and they were, you know, on television and everything. I mean, worldwide, this was really, they were very famous. But he said to Bing, you know, they'd love to see the set, etc. And Bing Crosby said, I'll ring them. So he rang Bing Crosby, lifted the phone and rang their agent. And he said, hello, I'm Bing Crosby. And the agent went, hi, and I'm Abe Lincoln. And Bing Crosby, silence. Bing Crosby, no, I'm actually Bing Crosby, the singer. Yeah, no, but I actually am. Anyway, it transpired, they all trooped off to the set of High Society. And it was an amazing experience, because it was the last film that Grace Kelly made. This was in March, and in April she sailed from Monaco to marry Prince Rainier. And the wedding dress that you saw, she was given that, but her present was her actual wedding dress. They made it, the seamstresses who did all the clothes for the film, but they gave her present, and that was her wedding dress. They made it. It was absolutely beautiful. For anybody who's ever seen the wedding, it was divine. And when we were with Sheila last Tuesday, I said, I couldn't resist, I said, and what was Grace Kelly like? Was she as beautiful? And Sheila just went, her hands went up, and she went, oh, she was stunning. She has never forgotten just how beautiful she was. But back to normality, I'm afraid. Before she had left in 1955, Mr. Michael McNamara, who's the director of the Municipal School of Music, he invited Sheila to start a class there. And starting with concert harp, and then maybe Irish harp, but she taught there until 1967, when she returned to the Symphony Orchestra. And this time she managed to last 20 years with RTE playing principal harp, but I'll let Andreja do that. She is an honorary member of the RDS. So like her father, she served on the subcommittee. And in '59, Cearl O'Dawley, who was to become President of Ireland, invited several people to meet him in the forecourts. He was Chief Justice, and 3 harpists was there. Katrina's mother, Gráinne Yates, Mercedes Garvey, and Sheila. And in 1960, he was discussing the future of the harp. They formed Cliona Doris. So you had Cearl O'Dawley, chairperson, Eileen Cahill-Reevy, secretary, Donal Sullivan, with whom she worked a huge amount, a lot of radio programs. And she is now president. Sheila is the president of Cliona Doris. And there we are. We were all invited up to our Snugthrone for President McAleese, and you see Gráinne, Elizabeth Hannon beside her. This is the founding committee, Mercedes and Sheila. Her name is synonymous with the World Harp Congress, but I'm not going to speak about this part of her career because Cliona will be speaking on it. But I will have to say that her magnum opus, let's give it, the Harp Tutor, was first published in 1975, and in her preface for the 2004 edition, Sheila stated, "It was my hope that its publication would mark the beginning of a new and exciting era for the harp." Now, to quote Cliona Doris's own website, it is the definitive tutor and companion to students for the Irish harp, and it was reprinted in 1977, 85, 93, and 2004. As a teacher of many years' duration, I have found this book to be the Bible of Irish harp music, and it has been, I had written down enjoyed, but it has been enjoyed by generations of my students. At the time of publication, there was a severe lack of published material for the harp. Sheila herself was a teacher and would have realised the drought of written music for Irish harp. She said, "I felt there was a need to write the Irish harp book." Sheila told us she approached all 12 contemporary composers and not one of them refused, even if they weren't particularly interested in the harp. And they were all paid as well. So she had included studies, exercises, advice for the student and the teacher. But for me, it's the wonderful contemporary music by the 12 composers, which has been the most remarkable aspect of this tome. Even to read the biographies of the harper composers, the harp contributors, the collectors, the contemporary composers, it's a wonderful resource for all musicians as well as harpists. But when I read down the list of composers, it struck me that out of the 12, 7, over half, had been taught by J.F. Larchet. She also decided that all monies received from the sale of the Irish Harp Tutor Book were to be donated to Cordon Cruit, a most generous gift. So her arrangers included Sheila, Grania Yates, Mercedes McGrath, Mercedes Garvey, Anne Crowley, just to name but a few. And she included arrangements from Hamilton Harty, Herbert Hughes, and Charles Villiers Stanford. In the book, she wrote a dedication to my parents, John and Madeleine Larchet, in grateful and in loving memory. As I finish my talk on Sheila and her family, and I know I have talked for a long time, but I'm sure as you know me, many are used to that already, but you can see that her background, of her father, that work ethic, that they wanted to serve the community, to serve music, really filtered its way without maybe her even realising, but she truly has done a most wonderful service to us for the harp. It has been incredible. But as I finish my talk on Sheila and her family, I would like to say that both Professor Dr. Cliona and I had the greatest pleasure to stand in our gowns beside Sheila as she was awarded an honorary doctorate by Dublin Institute of Technology, DIT Conservatoire, but it's now TU Dublin, on the 23rd of November 2013, in recognition of all her remarkable work, both nationally and internationally. And now, I'm going to hand you over to Andreja Malir.
I'd like to share some memories and historical moments from Sheila's illustrious career as an orchestral harpist. And although we know Sheila as the principal harpist of, as it was then, the Radio Éireann Symphony Orchestra, RTÉ National Symphony Orchestra, she started her illustrious orchestral career as a harpist of the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra under Sir Malcolm Sargent in 1946. It was a chance engagement with the then Belfast City Orchestra, with which Sheila went up to Dec with, after which she was invited by Sargent to join the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, a role she held for a year and a half. It was in 1948 Radio Éireann began the process of recruiting musicians for the newly formed Radio Éireann Symphony Orchestra, and wishing to return home after her time with the Liverpool Philharmonic, that Sheila applied for the position of principal harp and won the audition. The very first concert took place under the baton of Jean Martineau in the Phoenix Hall on Dame Street on February the 14th. The programme included works by Gabriel Fauré, Masque et Bergamasque, Brahms' Academic Festival Overture, and Hindemith's Matthias de Malir. It was interesting to note that the Phoenix Hall had been home to the Irish Sweepstakes, and for a while after the musicians occupied it, it had also acted as a quartermaster's store and held thousands of army blankets and mattresses. These were piled high, and one of the orchestra's first tasks was to cope with the plague of fleas that had found comfortable accommodation in the bedding. Jean Martinon's first concert with the orchestra was actually in 1946, and he was to remain with the orchestra for 7 years. It opened up the wonderful world of French music, and it was under Martinon that Sheila was to perform as soloist. Although a dedicated orchestral harpist, she always maintained that the role of orchestral musician was an art form all of its own. But Sheila stepped up twice to become soloist. The first was the 20th of May 1949 and March 31st, 1950. And she performed the introduction chanson and rondeau, composed in 1936 by Maurice Thirier, Martinon's fellow countryman and child prodigy, whose composition studies were funded by Maurice Ravel. They had served in the resistance during the war, and Thirier went on to have a substantial career as a film composer, composing over 70 scores. Writing in the RTE guide after Martinon's death in 1976, John O'Donovan commented, "Above all, he created the impression of a man who was the complete master of himself, whose head governed his heart, who shrank from sloppiness and was far too fastidious to play to the gallery. The women adored him and made no secret of it, but the rather shy smile, touched with sadness, inhibited the growth of jealousy in the men players. Besides, the men recognised his efficiency and knowledge of his craft. Thus, he had the knack of being able at one and the same time to display his ability and to disarm the resentment that ability arouses at close quarters, and he was second to none at fitting nailed fists into velvet gloves." Sadly, I couldn't find a recording of Sheila playing this concerto, but we do have an excerpt from a recording of 1966 with Jean Martinon conducting the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and Edward Rusiskino as soloist. By this time, in the late 40s, the influx of European musicians had started and continued well into the 60s. To look at the list of personnel in the orchestra, one could be forgiven for being unable to pinpoint which country this orchestra actually came from. And it was a nickname that remained for decades, and that it was forever called the United Nations Orchestra by visiting conductors. Although there were some Irish musicians, mainly hailing from either the dance bands, army bands or Cleary's tea rooms, their numbers were low, and in order to boost the numbers to an acceptable symphonic strength, invitations were sent out to a wider Europe to fill the gaps. The list of countries whence these musicians came was quite extensive. France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and it wasn't unusual to hear multiple languages being spoken at rehearsal. It has to be said that the legacy of these stranieri, this is quoted from Angie Massetti's documentary On One about the lives of the orchestra, lives on to this day through generations of their students. In particular, I'd like to mention Jaroslav Banachek, the eminent violinist from Prague that taught in the Royal Irish Academy of Music, and whose students went on to become professional musicians themselves. And at one point, the entire violin section had an entirely European sound. In 1950, an invitation came from the manager of the Halle Orchestra in Manchester for a person to replace the harpist who was leaving to get married. The prerequisite was only that they play in tune and they play in time. say, yes, the Halle Orchestra conducted by John Barbara with Sheila as soloist. So again, Sheila crossed the Irish Sea and remained with the Halle for 2 years, but it would be a friendship with the Barbarollis that would endure for decades. It was said of Sheila that she was John Barbarolli's favourite harpist. As an aside, it's interesting to note that Barbarolli, who was also a cellist and began his career in Covent Garden, was the first conductor to have appointed women principal wind and brass players in the orchestra, and also timpani, probably unheard of in the 50s. After Sheila's 2 years in the Halle, she returned to Dublin in 1952 and to the Radio Éireann Orchestra. Another protégé of Jean Martinon and his successor was Milan Horvat, a very young Yugoslav conductor who was invited regularly in the 40s and 50s, and in 1953 became principal conductor of the Radio Éireann. For our family, there was another connection with Milan Horvat, and that was that he conducted the Slovenian Philharmonic quite regularly. And from that orchestra, he invited a young Slovenian French horn player to become principal horn of the Radio Orchestra in Dublin. When this youngster was asked, would he like to come to Dublin? He replied, I don't want to go to Poland. He thought it was in Lublin. But to Dublin he came, and I owed a huge debt of gratitude to Milan Horvat for convincing my own father to come to Ireland and take up the position of principal horn in 1954, a position he held until 1980. In later years, Horvat went on to conduct the Austrian Radio Orchestra and Zagreb Philharmonic, and more recently, within 20 years ago, conducted a highly successful soundtrack to the movie Shine, based on the life of the Australian pianist David Helfgott. In the 1960s, the role of principal conductor was taken up by the enigmatic Hungarian Tibor Paul. A student of Kodály and Weingartner, he was appointed principal conductor in 1961. His repertoire was mainly German classics, and it was in the early 60s that, in fact, the seat of principal harp was actually deleted in favour of a sixth bass player. So listening to Sheila and Maura on an old lyric interview, they described him as a rather tempestuous and vain individual, very conscious of important people come to the concerts, and would request for the orchestra, ladies and gentlemen, vibrato on every note, 2 cabinet minister and archbishop come this evening. Sheila and Maura and many of the musicians would always speak of his short fuse and volatile nature. And one of those moments was recalled by Sheila on Aideen Gormley's interview with him in 2012. At rehearsal, I think this was probably for the opera, an altercation broke out between Tibor Paul and André Prieur, principal flute, on matters musical. It became very heated very quickly, and the orchestra manager, Val Keogh, had to step in and call a break, where the orchestra had to vacate the pit. The fight kept going and spilled out into the gangway under the Gaiety. Now, if anybody remembers the Gaiety in the 60s, the gangway was literally 2 feet wide. So this fight was heading towards Sheila and her harp box, and with nowhere to go, the only option for her to get out of the line of fire was to actually crawl into the harp box and let the fight pass, which it did, and normal service was resumed. Indeed, the list of conductors, soloists and composers that came through the programmes of the Symphony Orchestra during Sheila's time are lengthy and impressive. Some of the names: Hans Schmidt-Isserstedt, Albert Rosen, Bryden Thompson, Charles Lynch, Janusz Furst, Stravinsky, Bax, Shostakovich and Messiaen, who commented on the dubious quality of the rehearsal hall, not realising that the St. Francis Xavier Hall was actually the concert hall at the time. And over the decades, every Irish composer would have consulted with or collaborated with Sheila on their symphonic works. The harp position in the orchestra was reinstated in 1967 by Gerard Victory, and for the next 20 years, not only was the symphonic repertoire progressive and exciting, but there were plenty of opportunities for chamber music, and along with her sister Maura, Sheila became a member of the André Prieur Ensemble and the New Irish Chamber Orchestra. André Prieur came to Ireland in 1950 to replace Christian Lardet as principal flute. We remember Christian Lardet as he played here in Dublin with his wife Marie-Claire Jamet, the daughter of the eminent harpist Pierre Jamet. And André Prieur was also a founding member of the New Irish Chamber Orchestra, along with Lindsay Armstrong. The pre-air ensemble consisted of flute, violin, viola, cello and harp, and was to perform an extensive amount of French repertoire for that combination. Sheila also arranged many Irish works for that combination, and one of the performances with the Irish Chamber Orchestra was memorable for a variety of reasons, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. So they performed this arrangement of Carolyn Air, and as you can see, apologies for the quality of the photograph. This was taken in Donegal, and you can see the quality of the hall they had to play in. So I'm going to quote from Lindsay Armstrong, his wonderful book, A Manager's Tale, about the new Irish Chamber Orchestra in the 70s. This was undoubtedly a most curious and unusual concert. It took place in the open air in the ancient ring fort of Grianán Éileach, literally the summer place of Éileach, set on top of an 800-foot high hill in County Donegal, west of Derry. The event seemed to catch the imagination of the district, as it was attended by a very large crowd. The acoustics were surprisingly good, and there was a feeling of rapport with the audience. Clothes pegs were needed to prevent the music blowing off the music stands, But all this served only to enhance the intimacy of the occasion. Just before starting the Mozart Symphony, a torrential downpour stopped the play and brought the proceedings to a premature end. Despite this, the organisers counted the event as a huge success. Looking back over the various sources, Patrick Kelly's wonderful book, 50 Years of the Orchestra, Lindsay Armstrong, The Manager's Tale, and Patrick Joseph's Kyo, his dissertation, it has been extraordinary to view the extensive and adventurous repertoire that's been performed over these decades. And I count myself so fortunate to have grown up amongst these incredible musicians and to have received such guidance from Sheila, my first harp teacher. In 1988, it was indeed a magical moment for me when I started my professional career in the orchestra. The first concert was Bachler II, conducted by Janusz First, and my co-pilot for my first flight was Sheila herself. We had simply swapped seats.
I told you this was going to be a fantastic speech, fantastic. You caught the whole feeling of that time. I'm going to ask my colleague, Cliona Doris, I'm pronouncing it that way because a lot of the World Harp Congress call her Cliona. So could Cliona please join? Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure to speak about the significant international dimension to Dr. Sheila Larchet Cuthbert's career, focusing on her work with the World Harp Congress. The World Harp Congress is an international harp organisation with harpists from over 50 countries. The idea for such an organisation can be traced back to the Harp Weeks of Via Bergout and Maria Kaczynska in the Netherlands, an initiative that also started in 1960, same as Cliona Doris. The World Harp Congress was formed in 1981 and incorporated in 1982, with the first Congress taking place in Maastricht in the Netherlands in 1983. Sheila attended the second Congress, which took place in Israel in 1985, and she was invited by Linda Wood Rollo, who was the founding editor of the World Harp Congress Review, to become the Irish correspondent. This was an important step for Ireland, as it meant that the key harping developments and activities here were disseminated regularly to an international harp audience. Indeed, from Sheila's involvement with the World Harp Congress, you can trace an ever-increasing engagement with the harp in Ireland, particularly through Congress programmes. In 1990, Sheila was elected to the Board of Directors, and in 1996 to the Corporation of the World Harp Congress, and has attended meetings online until recently, but she travelled all across the world with this work. Sheila's connection with the World Harp Congress has a particular important impact in my early musical career. Through the World Harp Congress, she met Suzanne McDonald, Denise mentioned, then the artistic director of the World Harp Congress, and she also visited Indiana University in Bloomington. And I remember her very excitingly telling me all about it when she was coaching me in the National Youth Orchestra of Ireland. I had the opportunity to apply for a Hamilton Harty Scholarship at Queen's University for an international masterclass in the summer of 1991. Denise, my teacher, and Sheila conferred, as they often did and still do, and suggested that I apply to attend Suzanne McDonnell's summer masterclass at Indiana University. And this led me to return there for my postgraduate studies the next year. This is an example of the many instances where Sheila has been instrumental in wisely supporting and guiding young harpists, and many of us here have benefited from her wisdom, imagination and generosity throughout our careers. She's been a guiding light through her deep respect for music, her artistry and her professionalism. The first World Harp Congress that I attended was in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1993, and I saw firsthand how valued and respected Sheila was by her fellow board members. The next Congress was in Seattle, Tacoma, and I have wonderful memories of Andreja, Denise and me, all performing on the same day. Andreja and I were sharing a programme of concertos with piano, and Andreja was introducing Philip Martin's harp concerto with Philip on the piano. And then Denise was premiering a new work for voice and harp later in that day. Sheila was just so proud, and she has a wonderful way of drawing attention to capturing a significant moment. So, these are the photographs on a hill in Tacoma outside the Rialto Theatre at that significant moment. And I remember it as if those images are implanted because she made sure we were remembering it. Sheila opened the international world to us. I remember Sheila returning from the World Harp Congress board meetings in 1998 and issuing invitations to the harping community to join her at her home to discuss a proposal. It had been suggested at the board meetings that Ireland, or the recent ones in 1998, that Ireland might consider submitting a bid to host a congress. This was really unimaginable at the time, but I recall her saying that she heard this little voice, which was hers, agreeing to consult her Irish colleagues on this idea. The meeting back in Dublin was to break this news to us. With some trepidation, we started the process, but once we started, it gathered momentum and goodwill. As Denise reminded me this week, we were called the Dream Team by the World Harp Congress Board of Directors, and I can say without any hesitation that the success of the 9th World Harp Congress, Dublin 2005, was because of Sheila Larchet Cuthbert. I wrote in the World Harp Congress Review in the fall 2005 version after the Congress, and I quote, "I would like to end this letter by paying tribute to a truly remarkable and special lady, and that is Sheila Larchet Cuthbert." And I continue, "I am sure that as she attended the Holland Harp Weeks and the first World Harp Congresses, that she did not dare dream that a Congress would take place in Ireland. However, the reality of the 9th World Harp Congress taking place in Dublin is a tribute to Sheila's dedication and vision. It was with great pleasure during the opening reception in Dublin Castle that we had the opportunity to dedicate the Congress to Sheila, and there's a small image, it's not the best quality, with Sheila being presented with a bouquet of flowers by Olive Braden, who was the chair of the Arts Council at that stage, and me announcing that we were dedicating the Congress to her. So that is the moment, another moment of history. Sheila mentored us through the whole complex artistic and operational decisions with wisdom, patience and integrity. I know that I, Andreja and Denise and all the members of the World Harp Congress 2005 host committee valued the time that we spent together at meetings, but also the supportive social aspect before and after meetings, and Sheila was at the very centre of this. I've always considered Sheila as an international diplomat, and this belief has been reaffirmed through working with her closely with the World Harp Congress Board of Directors in the lead up to the 2005 Congress, and later when I joined her on the board and then the corporation. In 2005, we celebrated the Harp in Ireland in all its facets through a truly magical opening concert at St Patrick's Cathedral, evoking Ireland's bardic tradition with Seamus Heaney, and featuring wire-strung, lever and pedal harps. We programmed 2 Irish harp concertos with the National Symphony Orchestra and the Ulster Orchestra, and shared wonderful daily Celtic highlights with our international guests, to mention a few Irish high points. The World Harp Congress continues to celebrate Dr. Sheila Larchet. This slide displays articles in the World Harp Congress reviews. The first one marks her honorary doctorate in 2013, and this is the citation that they published. And the second one is of this year, celebrating her 100th birthday. And this is, I introduced Brian O'Rourke, wrote a beautiful speech that was recited by Lindsay Armstrong on the day of her birthday in the National Concert Hall, in the presence of the National Symphony Orchestra, and these are the Brian O'Rourke's wonderful words. So they're both published in the World Harp Congress reviews. Such is the respect that they have for her and continue to have for her. The Irish involvement with the World Harp Congress has only increased since, And at the last memorable Congress in Cardiff, Wales in 2022, it seemed that all of Ireland's harpists had temporarily moved across the Irish Sea. And you'll see why. Just a few harps. After documenting the diversity of the Irish involvement, it's just a side, Sheila always insisted that we had, that we had to properly, when we went to congresses, that we didn't constantly go to concerts. And I love the picture of all of us at the table on one of those days, and that they're all Irish harpists, and that's just on one day. People were coming in and out all the time. It's Music Generation, the collective, you can see there, and I'm not going to be proud of this to you, Dublin Conservatoire, so that links with Sheila's work in the College of Music. So it's just a wonderful, it just was a wonderful week, and many, many Irish harpists played. So after documenting the diversity of this Irish involvement, I wrote in my report of the 2022 Welsh Congress for Cuthbert Cruit's newsletter, and I quote, "I wish to pay tribute to the significant and valued contribution of Cuthbert Cruit's president, Sheila Larchet Cuthbert, to the World Harp Congress over many years. Firstly as correspondent, representing Ireland, then as a member of the board of directors, and later a member of the corporation, and her leadership in the 9th World Harp Congress, Dublin 2005. She has supported and encouraged many harpists from Ireland in their engagement with the World Harp Congress. Sheila was unable to attend the Cardiff Congress, but how proud she must be of the large Irish delegation in Wales this summer. It was a true testament to her commitment and her many years of voluntary service to Irish harpists by connecting us to the international harp world through the World Harp Congress."
Thank you very much. I know a lot of you would have been expecting that we would play ourselves, and you may notice there is no harp here. But we actually discovered so much music with Sheila playing, and we thought it was for Sheila to shine, that you would all hear Sheila playing and not us playing Sheila's arrangements. I want to thank my two colleagues for a wonderful, I suppose, insights into her. I met Sheila when I was supposed to be her student. She was to teach me, and she said a young harpist was coming back, Katrina Yates, and she thought she would be starting a class, and it would be good to start a class with Katrina, who I said was here today. But Sheila, I had her for the youth orchestra, and then when I came back from London, I went into the symphony orchestra, and I was with her for probably 8 years playing second harp, and it was a remarkable experience. She is a very, very fine musician to play with, a wonderful teacher, a wonderful colleague, and she taught me lots of lessons. One, if anything happens, never think about it. Keep moving on, because the minute you think your concentration has gone, and I've always quoted that to the students. The other thing that she was a very fine colleague, and a very good friend, and a loyal friend. A confidant. She knew a lot of my secrets. They would never go anywhere, and she would smooth out everything. And I was delighted. Her seat was taken over by Andreja, but I want to make a complaint that every day I was with Sheila Larchet Cuthbert, I got tea time express cake and a cup of tea. And I've never had the same from Andreja. Standards have slipped. But it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. We have such warmth and such memories of working with Sheila, and it was such a pleasure to be with her. So exciting on Tuesday. Mary came in as well, and we had such fun playing the harp and chatting, and her memory is fantastic. And she was able to answer loads of questions we had. I hope that this small snapshot into this remarkable woman has been of perhaps interest to you today. I know a lot of you really know her and love her, but I hope you might have learned something, little bits. I've learned a lot since I started researching. And I want to thank Mary for her very kind and good-natured words with us. I hope we've done your mother justice. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to Aileen for hosting this. It's been an amazing experience for all three of us. It's been fantastic. Love to Sheila, and keep plucking. And I just want to say we are going to end, not with me talking, that's why I'm going to, you'll be delighted to know. I just want to say I'd like to finish with Sheila playing, and it is the recording that Courtney Cruth had for her birthday. Thank you.